St. Louis, Michigan was founded in 1853 by Joseph Clapp, who began building a dam and sawmill on the banks of the Pine River that ran through the land. About 15 years later, two St. Louis residents found mineral water underground while drilling for salt. This water was believed to have healing powers and attracted the rich and famous who traveled from across the country to experience the purported benefits. Various establishments, such as the Holcomb Opera House, lavish hotels, and an assortment of businesses were built to accommodate the needs of tourists and support the growing economy of the area. Now, over 150 years later, St. Louis's water is doing much more harm than good. Where healing waters once attracted tourists, the town's polluted water and soil are now a continuing concern for residents and environmental professionals alike. The events leading to this pollution have been the topic of several books and movies, including Silent Spring by Rachel Carson and Bitter Harvest by Rick and Sandra Halbert. Our story begins in 1935 when Michigan Chemical Corporation was established in St. Louis and became the city's largest employer. The plant site was surrounded by the Pine River on three sides. Michigan Chemical made mostly salt-based products using underground brine reservoirs under the name of its subsidiary Michigan Salt Company until 1940 when they began researching chemical production. In 1944, Michigan Chemical began making dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, commonly known as DDT. DDT was the first modern synthetic insecticide. It was well received by the public and considered a wonder chemical due to its low cost, efficacy, and longevity in environments where it was applied, as a result of its long half-life, which was later found to be up to 15 years in soil and 150 years in water. DDT attacks the nervous system and is more easily absorbed through the exoskeleton of insects than through the skin of mammals. It was widely used for many purposes, from household use to farm pest control to insect-borne human disease prevention for the general public and the military population abroad during World War II. In 1963, the Vesicle Chemical Corporation bought the Michigan Chemical Corporation. The following year, in 1964, Vesicle stopped making DDT. DDT was being called into question as a safe and effective pesticide, as some insects grew resistant to the chemical and other animals began to experience toxic effects. Various effects were observed in mammals, including neurological effects such as tremors and coordination issues. Non-mammalian species were also affected. In avian species, DDT causes eggshell thinning and death of embryos, consequently decreasing the reproductive success of birds. The dwindling bald eagle population began to recover after the United States banned the use of DDT in 1972. Aquatic species are especially susceptible to the toxic effects of DDT. Due to the long half-life of DDT, banning its use was certainly not an immediate fix, and the pesticide lingers in the environment and in the fatty tissues of wildlife and humans alike. DDT is now considered a probable human carcinogen, among other health risks, based on studies conducted using animal models. In 1970, Vesicle began producing a commercial flame retardant called Firemaster BP6, composed of an isomeric mixture of polybrominated biphenyl, or PBB for short. At the same time, the plant was producing Nutrimaster, a magnesium oxide livestock feed additive. These two products were packaged in similar bags before being shipped to customers. This lack of distinctive packaging led to a devastating mix-up in 1973. Instead of shipping out Nutrimaster as intended, Vesicle employees accidentally sent bags containing Firemaster to Farm Bureau Services in Battle Creek, Michigan. The Firemaster was added to livestock feed, which was distributed throughout the state and purchased by farmers. One cattle farmer, Rick Halbert, noticed the health of his herd was declining. As a result, their milk production decreased. Worried that his livelihood was in jeopardy, Halbert began considering possible causes for the sudden illness in the herd and decided to send feed samples to a lab for testing. Later that year, Vesicle stopped producing Firemaster due to liability concerns. This incident was devastating and costly for the state of Michigan. Over 500 contaminated farms were quarantined. Over 800 tons of animal feed, 42,500 pounds of dairy products, and 5 million eggs were seized and destroyed. Approximately 1,500 sheep, 4,500 swine, 30,000 cattle, and 1.5 million chickens were slaughtered. In addition to those losses, Michigan residents were left with the uncertainty of how this contamination would affect their long-term health. In 1976, PBB production was discontinued in the United States. With its reputation tarnished by the massive PBB incident, Michigan Chemical Corporation was dissolved. Vesicle operations continued in St. Louis until 1978 when the plant closed after 43 years of chemical production. The plant was demolished with some structures, such as storage tanks and piping, being buried on the land. In 1982, toxic soil from a separate vesicle burn pit area was excavated and relocated to the main plant site. A cap was placed on top of the land, and a 2-foot-thick slurry wall dividing the vesicle site and the Pine River was installed underground. Vesicle agreed on a $38.5 million settlement with the state of Michigan, which would be used to reimburse some farmers for damages and fund cleanup efforts of the state and Environmental Protection Agency, commonly called the EPA. It was assumed that the contamination would be entirely covered and contained to avoid spread of contaminants present at the former plant site. As a result, Vesicle was not held liable for any contamination found outside of the plant site. In 1994, the state of Michigan and the EPA requested that Vesicle perform an assessment on their containment system at the former plant site. These assessments showed that the clay cap that was installed by Vesicle was leaking. In 1997, local citizens formed the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force and began advocating for cleanup of the contamination. Vesicle announced plans to begin repairing the cap beginning in summer 1998. Meanwhile, the EPA discovered that the slurry wall installed by Vesicle to prevent contamination of the Pine River had also failed. A cleanup project to remove highly contaminated sediments from the Pine River began. By 2006, 640,000 cubic yards of sediment had been removed from the river. This contaminated sediment contained over 200 tons of DDT. In 1999, shortly after the EPA cleanup project began, Vesicle's parent company filed for bankruptcy and ceased to fund cleanup of the St. Louis contamination. The parent company was bought out by another corporation in 2002, with the toxic plant and burning pit sites excluded from the transaction. As a result, the site became orphaned, with no responsible party paying for future cleanup efforts. Taxpayers were left to cover the cost. In 2005, the EPA conducted tests that discovered low levels of parachlorobenzene sulfonic acid, known as PCBSA, in city wells. PCBSA is a byproduct of DDT manufacturing. No established drinking water limits existed for this substance, so long-term health risks from exposure were not known. This discovery served as a warning that other chemicals that were leaking from the Vesicle plant site, such as DDT and PBB, may be making their way into the town's water supply. As a result, St. Louis Public Schools temporarily discontinued student use of water fountains. In 2006, the state of Michigan reported significant soil and groundwater contamination in St. Louis. High levels of both PBB and DDT were found in the neighborhood adjacent to the former Vesicle plant site. The EPA removed 50,000 tons of contaminated soil from the former plant site and residential areas during the summer of 2006. In 2007, the city of St. Louis filed a lawsuit against Vesicle to fund a new water supply for the city, resulting in a $26.5 million settlement in 2011. In 2012, the city of St. Louis and neighboring town Alma came together to form the Gratiot Area Water Authority, with plans to install a unified water system with an estimated cost of $45 million. Also in 2012, the EPA released its plan to clean up the contamination at the Vesicle Chemical Corporation / Pine River Superfund site with an estimated cost of $300 to $350 million. In 2014, the EPA began evacuating yards near the former Vesicle site to remove soil that is contaminated with DDT and PBB. The EPA recommended a thermal treatment and soil cover of the former Vesicle burn pit site with an estimated cost of $23 million. The Gratiot Area Water Authority began constructing the new joint water supply in 2014. Both St. Louis and neighboring town Alma began using this water supply in 2015. At this time, in 2019, the EPA has determined that human exposure at the Vesicle Chemical Corporation Superfund site in St. Louis is not under control, meaning that residents could be exposed to unsafe levels of contaminants. Additionally, the migration of groundwater contamination is not stabilized. the EPA has identified 15 different contaminants of concern, COCs, currently present in groundwater and soil, including DDT and PBB. So far, the cleanup efforts have decreased DDT levels in fish by over 98%, but a no consumption advisory is still in place for all fish living in the Pine River. This advisory will remain until the site is completely cleaned up. The EPA will continue their cleanup efforts in the years to come and share progress and updates on their website along with opportunities to get involved. Additionally, concerned parties can join the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force, which meets on the third Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. in St. Louis City Hall. More information is available online on City of St. Louis's website, www.stlouismi.com.